Guys, we've made it! The culmination of the entire MCU, Avengers Endgame. Right here, part 22 out of 23 of this Infinity Saga rewatch. Thank you guys so much for the support. It's meant so much to me, you have no idea. And it's just been such a pure joy to be able to make these videos and share my thoughts with you guys and have people actually respond to them, which has just been so unbelievable. But let's not dilly-dally anymore. Here's my review of Avengers Endgame. And honestly, let's be honest, the real accomplishment wasn't the culmination of the entirety of the Infinity Saga. The real accomplishment was sneaking in both a dab and Fortnite into a Marvel movie. Because honestly, I still can't believe that they actually did that. You know the drill by now, and especially with this movie, massive spoilers ahead for Avengers Endgame and the rest of the MCU. You have been warned. Final warning. So I just want to mention that, like the Infinity War review, we're going to go scene by scene in this review. This is the biggest MCU movie, and this deserves the biggest review thus far. And I'm even trying to top Infinity War, so yeah, grab your popcorn, because this could be a long one. So before we get started, make sure to subscribe and like the video. The Infinity War and Endgame videos especially took a ton of time and effort, and I'm really proud of the way that they turned out, and I hope you guys really enjoy them, and just leaving your support down below and subscribing would mean the world to me. So again, thank you guys so much. Alright, enough being sappy. Let's start the review. So, actually, if you look at Avengers Endgame, it really lends itself very nicely to a 3-act structure, which is really surprising, actually. Because up front, one of the problems that I have with Avengers Endgame, and maybe this isn't such a big problem, but it's still something that I think about and notice every time I see the movie, is that Avengers Endgame is really one of the few MCU movies that really cannot stand alone. Like, even sequels such as Captain America Winter Soldier, Ant-Man and the Wasp, for example, you can watch those movies as a new MCU fan and still sort of get the concept. But I think if you watch Avengers Endgame, you're really not going to have a great time if you've never seen any Marvel movies before. I mean, it's going to make some sense, I guess, like time travel and undoing something and all of that, but really Avengers Endgame is not meant to stand alone as a film. However, surprisingly, within this film, it actually functions really nicely as a 3-act structure film, and there are very distinct markers, which I'll go over later on in the video. Before we get to Act 1 though, this film does have a little bit of a prologue, so let's start out with the Hawkeye scene. First of all, before this movie even came out, I think a lot of us knew that this was the way that this movie was going to start, right? Because Hawkeye was noticeably absent in Avengers Infinity War, and we all figured, well, if he's absent in Infinity War, but he's going to be in Endgame, then we might as well see him early, right? And also his family's going to die because how else is he going to become Ronin, right? So it makes sense. This was a pretty logical way to start this movie out. However, I will say that even though we were all expecting it, it just kind of felt sudden. Like, there wasn't enough time for the impact of the deaths to sink in. And maybe that's my fault for, really speculating and suspecting that this was going to be the beginning of the movie. And maybe that's why I wasn't so surprised. But there was just literally no shock value to this opening scene. Like, versus when Peter Parker dusted, I felt this huge wave of emotion. Whereas when Hawkeye's kids died, which should have been a really impactful scene, I just felt nothing. I was kind of like, oh, alright, that happened. In my mind, it would have been a little bit better if Clint literally saw his kids disappear and was grasping onto them on their last moments, right? Because really, we don't really have an attachment to Clint's kids. We have an attachment to the character of Clint Barton, which is why it would have been impactful in that case if Clint saw them disappear. Instead, they just go poof. And so we have the first 5 minutes of the movie. Okay, fine. And then we get the Marvel logo. Now look, I'm going to fully admit right now that there are things I don't like about Avengers Endgame. And a lot of them may seem nitpicky to you. But if we're going scene by scene, and if we're going to do this analysis, and if we're going to do it right, then I'm going to be honest with you guys, and just share everything that I don't like about this movie, as well as everything that I do like. And one of the things that I really don't like about this movie, and this is completely subjective, I'm sure that some people do really like this or just don't care, is the music. And I'm not talking about the orchestral score, because we're going to talk about Alan Silvestri in a little bit. I'm talking about the random pop music that appears here and there in Avengers Endgame. To be fair, Dear Mr. Fantasy and its use at the beginning with the Marvel logo is not the worst one out of the bunch. I think there are other instances where the music just feels really jarring and really sudden. I just think that we needed a little bit more time to let the Hawkeye kids and family deaths sink in, right? Like, the Dear Mr. Fantasy song starts playing almost immediately afterwards, and it feels like this weird tonal shift that the audience wasn't really ready for, but were just thrust into it. And also, side note, you guys know me if you've watched these reviews, that I just don't like it when pop music comes out of nowhere. It just doesn't make sense, right? Because to me, that's the filmmakers fully admitting right there that no, this is fake. Whereas I want to be really immersed. And so I would have just really appreciated if the Russo brothers, threw in a shot of like Quill's mixtape playing in the background with Dear Mr. Fantasy, because it is implied that Dear Mr. Fantasy is playing from the Benatar because it is Quill's ship, right? But I just would have liked to see it, Like, it's part of the reason why the Umbrella Academy kind of threw me off, because there's just so much random pop music inserted, but whatever, to each their own. Now, Tony and Nebula, they are an odd pairing, but they do work. It's pretty okay. Like, a lot of people were saying, I love the pairing of Tony and Nebula. I don't really have that big of an attachment to them. And to be honest, their relationship doesn't really get explored past the first 20 minutes or so, but it was pretty okay. What I do love about the opening is how dark it is right away. I love the dark tone, because this is how this movie should have been. It should have been bleak, it should have been despondent, especially after what happened at the end of Infinity War. I love literally everything about Tony's speech to Pepper. And you know what makes it 1,000 times better is the orchestral score. If you watch Endgame again, it's the same music that's played at his funeral. It's brilliant foreshadowing. And later when he comes back to the compound, I believe Silvestri is playing a version of Portals as well, because, that's just brilliant right there. And Alan Silvestri, he somehow outdoes himself here. Like, how in the world did he do that? The orchestral music in Avengers Endgame is on another level. It just wrenches emotion right out of you at just the right moments. And I'm telling you guys, I've said this so many times before, music makes a movie. 95% of the time, you cannot get that raw emotion from just a pure performance. You need the music. Anyways, Captain Marvel's here. Honestly, I'm sort of agnostic about this. Before this movie came out, everyone was speculating, how is Tony going to escape this and all that sort of stuff. And I was like, it's probably going to be Captain Marvel, and it was. And honestly, I'm totally fine with it. I think we all sort of knew in the back of our minds that she would be the one to come and get him, and that's honestly okay. So now we get back to the Avengers compound, and guess what? Steve has shaved. And honestly, that's a good thing. I know, again, that this is a very small, minor detail, but again, if I'm going to point out nitpicks, I'm going to point out small things I like too. So yeah, the beard was great and everything, but this is the final Avengers film in the Infinity Saga. We need the classic Steve. Totally great move. And I love these scenes as well. Now, granted, we were all speculating how are Tony and Steve going to meet up again after the whole events of Civil War and Infinity War. It was sort of anticlimactic, like they just sort of nodded at each other and were like, okay, we're cool, and they argued a little bit, but I guess in the grand scheme of things, it's fine. Like, honestly, there were just so many things that we were speculating about before this movie came out that ended up just being sort of little minor nitpick points, right? Like Tony and Steve's reunion, or how is Tony going to escape space? So, in the grand scheme of things, it's whatever. And also, if we're going to talk about nitpicks, maybe the Build-A-Bear joke doesn't fit in too well. Like, everyone's sort of grieving, and then Tony just kind of like, Build-A-Bear, and Rocket's like, yeah, maybe I am. And I'm like, what is happening? But anyways, I love the callbacks to Ultron and Civil War. Those lines and those films have consequences. And it shows here with Tony and Steve, right? Because they're still hung up about Ultron, which is a really, really cool detail. But okay, now we're here. Let's talk about Carol Danvers. So if you've watched my review of Captain Marvel, you know that I really, really liked Brie Larson in that film. A lot better, at least, than in this movie. From what I understand, these scenes in Endgame were some of the first scenes she ever filmed in the MCU. And honestly, I hate them. Marcus and McFeely, you write great dialogue for Tony and Steve. But I'm gonna say it. You dropped the ball big time for Carol Danvers. She is so incredibly unlikable in this movie, and it really, really soured the taste for a lot of people, including myself, on this character. Again, I had to see Captain Marvel again to realize that no, Brie Larson is still a great actress, and she still has a ton of potential in this role, but in Endgame, I just couldn't stand this character. Please fix this in future movies, guys. Now, it makes sense that the Avengers would be able to find Thanos once he snaps his fingers again. And I think that's a pretty interesting angle, right? Because Thanos is trying to destroy the stones, he thinks they're temptation, and the Avengers would be able to find this through their scanning or whatever they've used. And again, I have to compliment the Russos because I love how gritty the tone is. From literally Steve Rogers, Captain America swearing, and then it cuts to the Avengers logo. Like, that's bold right there. These characters have literally been through hell and back, and it shows. So now the Avengers head off to space after we get the Avengers logo, which is, again, great as usual. And I just love the stealth suit, that it's back. Because I guess the Russos were like, hey, we can use literally any suit we want to because it doesn't really matter. It's not going to be used for the rest of the movie. And yeah, pick the stealth suit. Why not? Who cares? I think it's kind of funny also that Thanos is just wearing a t-shirt. Like, do aliens wear t-shirts? Seems kind of weird to me. Like, I would have thought maybe an alien robe or something. Again, small nitpick, whatever. And then again, I also love how Thor is just so upset when he sees the stones are destroyed, and he just straight up murders Thanos. And so the prologue ends, right? And that's sort of what we thought the movie was going to be from the trailers. Like, we thought the first 20 minutes of what we just saw in Endgame was going to be the movie. And 97% of this prologue these first 15 to 20 minutes, I adore. I think this was the perfect way to start out the culmination of the MCU. And guys, we haven't even gotten to Act 1. So yeah, here we go. So now we get the 5 years later, which again was a brilliant move by the Russos. They were brilliant in hiding it. It was great. Well done. Well done. And so Act 1 starts, and we get to see how the snap affected the entire world. And Steve Rogers is doing what everyone thought Steve Rogers would do in this sort of scenario. He's helping people in any way he can. He's not being Captain America per se, but he is holding a support group, and honestly, that is the most Steve Rogers thing that I could ever think of. So yeah, I think that's great. And now we get to see Scott Lang. And again, if you've seen my reviews for the previous films, you know I adore Paul Rudd. I think he is one of the best actors in the entire MCU. His character is great. Love him. Love him in any of the MCU movies. But let's talk about the Rat before we get on to anything about Ant-Man. So look, here's my little spiel about the Rat. Technically, in universe, in canon, if these characters were real, like, listen, it's been 5 years. Theoretically, in terms of probability, the Avengers were going to catch a break, right? Like, the universe isn't that unfair. It was going to happen. So in that sense, I'm okay with the Rat. But outside of that universe, in our world, in the real world, what does this reveal about the writers? Does it really say that they literally couldn't make up anything better? Like, Marcus and McFeely, did you guys really rack your brains and this was the best solution that you could have come up with? That sort of sends alarm bells to me, right? Like, it just sort of seems a little off. Like, how about something like this? Ken Jeong, who plays the security guard in Avengers Endgame, where Scott Lang is, coming out of the quantum realm, he could have just literally gone down to the vaults, expecting the van, and he could have just, fiddled with some of the buttons, right? And released Scott Lang. I think that would have accomplished literally the same thing. And maybe people wouldn't have liked that in this alternate universe that I just made up, but if I went to this alternate timeline and told you that, well, your other option was having a rat accidentally release Scott Lang, I think almost all of you guys would say, no, you prefer the Ken Jeong way. So I'm just saying, I'm able to come up with a better scenario, in my opinion anyways. Maybe you guys like the rat, I don't know. But in my opinion, I'm able to come up with a better solution in 5 minutes. It kind of just shows that Marcus and McFeely were sort of being lazy, or maybe they weren't. I don't know what the scenario was. But yeah, it feels weird to me. So anyways, that's my little rant about the rat. Anyways, moving on. So yeah, Scott Lang is sort of our surrogate, right? He's kind of like the guy who's like, what in the world happened? And trying to figure everything out. And I love the scene with him and Cassie Lang, the older Cassie Lang. I think the actress who plays her is pretty okay. She's fine. Doesn't really add a ton. Doesn't detract a ton either. But Scott Lang, Paul Rudd's performance in that scene, amazing. You can see everything on his face, the emotions of seeing his daughter again. It was so pure, and I love that. So now we move on to the compound, where Natasha is sort of doing debriefings with the rest of the Avengers. Again, Captain Marvel is here, and she is extremely unlikable because she's just yelling at Rocket. But anyways, she's not going to come back for a long while, so yeah. Scarlett Johansson gets to really shine here, though, and showcase just how much she's grown as an actress, because I don't think she'd be able to pull this off in Iron Man 2 almost 9 years before this movie came out. Her conversation with Steve is one of the best scenes in the entire movie. It's subtle, it's quiet, but I love how there's just, zero action, zero drama. It's just two friends talking about what's happened. And I love that. I love how there's just zero action in the first 30 minutes. This movie is taking its sweet time, and I'm here for that. And also calling back to the Winter Soldier, their relationship, brother-sister sort of dynamic, I think that's completely great. Everything about that is awesome. So now we get Scott Lang, who's appearing, and he's basically trying to explain time travel to him. And okay, we all sort of suspected that time travel is going to be at play in this film. But even so, time travel itself is not a very easy plot device to swallow for the audience, let's say. Okay, Scott Lang is here, and let's just be honest with ourselves, right? Time travel is ridiculous, at least from what we know now, and the way the movies explain them. It's just a ridiculous concept, right? It's very science fiction-y, it's very gimmicky, all that sort of stuff. And even though Scott Lang and later Bruce acknowledge it, they say, oh yeah, this is ridiculous, time travel or whatever, it doesn't make it any less ridiculous, right? So honestly, it's just up to you as an audience member to take it or leave it. And part of me kind of wishes they took a little bit more time to make it a little bit more serious, because honestly, half the time they're just joking about it and how dumb it is. But I guess it's fine, the way they dealt with it. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Now we move on to Tony, and I love everything about what the Russos did with Tony in this 2023 timeline. I love the fact that he has a family. Compare this to the first Iron Man, and just what a full circle moment for our hero. And Morgan Stark is adorable, but of course you didn't need me to tell you that, right? And I just love how much he's grown, both as a character as well as in his relationships. It's such a great way to take this character. Love his motivations as well. Love how he says to Steve, listen, this is my second chance. I got it. I just can't give it up. But okay, Tony refuses. So let's talk about Hulk. Now, sorry, Russos. I'm going to say it. I think you do a lot of great things here, but I am not a fan. I am really not a fan. Granted, the smart Hulk character himself, I am okay with. I think he's fine. And it's fun to see Ruffalo acting as the Hulk like a normal human being. But come on, there's a real reason why we wanted a Hulk v Thanos fight. Like, stop saying, Russos, that it was too conventional. There are just some things that we wanted, and there is a good reason for it. So why didn't you give that to us? I would be okay with Smart Hulk if he has the ability to at least go Berserk Hulk at one moment, right? At one moment in the ending battle where he sees Thanos, and he's like, I had to kill Natasha, or Clint had to kill Natasha for this, and now I'm going to make you pay. Like, something like that, right? And seriously, dabbing? This one makes no sense in real life and in universe. It's 2023. You think anyone's still dabbing? I mean, honestly. There are just moments in the story and script that make it feel like Marcus and McFeely just gave up, and it really, really confuses me, because this wasn't an issue in Infinity War. So I don't know what happened between these two films. So then Tony figures out time travel, and honestly, I mean, he figured it out in like an evening. I know it's super quick, but I guess, honestly, like time travel itself, we gotta get on board with it. So yeah, we're on board with it, I guess. Whatever. But also we get I Love You 3000 here, which is gold. So there it is. And also I love the little conversation he has with Pepper where they're talking. I think this is also one of the best, most underrated scenes in this movie and in the MCU, where Pepper just looks at him and goes, are you going to be able to rest if you do it? And I think that's such a brilliant line. That's a good piece of writing. It just, honestly, going back to what I said before, it confuses me how they write that, Marcus and McFeely, and then they write a dabbing Hulk. Like, what? So then Hulk and the rest of the Avengers who are remaining, Steve and Natasha, they're testing time travel with Scott. That's fun. Again, it's just sort of a huge departure from the grim tone at the beginning, which honestly is fine. Like, shifting tones in itself is okay. It's been 5 years. They have a right to be optimistic now that Scott Lang is here. It's just, as a moviegoer and you seeing this, for the first time, it just feels a little bit sudden to me. Like, they're still lacking that sense of urgency, I guess. I don't know. There's no sort of desperation in this. Like, Hulk is saying, time travel, and I'm like, well, but you know what's at stake, right? Anyway, Steve and Tony reconcile, and that, again, feels a little less dramatic and meaningful than I would have liked, but again, we're just going to go with it because 3 hours got 3 hours, right? And also tacos. I mean, just watch this. It's beautiful. Best scene in the movie. Not really, but honestly, kind of. All right, so now let's move on to Thor. Endgame Thor. Okay, here we go. So another instance of just random pop music before I get to Thor is inserted into this movie as Hulk and Rocket are traveling to New Asgard, and I don't know why. I don't know why they just put in this random pop song. Like, they could have used the orchestral score. You have Alan Silvestri. Like, come on. At least for people like me, just have the Hulk turning the radio on or something, because that music just comes out of nowhere. Like, it's what? All right, but let's get on to one of the biggest talking points of this entire video, and that is Endgame Thor. I'll probably end up making a separate video on this and my thoughts on why it didn't work, but here's the deal. Here's the TLDR. I think Thor and him getting overweight and drinking, I think that is fine. And honestly, I like how really bold and confident the Russos were in making this decision. I am all for that. However, Marvel has a problem with this. Let me explain. When characters are struggling with real issues like depression, anxiety, drinking, PTSD, Marvel tends to make these jokes because they don't really know how to handle them. Honestly, Iron Man 3 was probably the best handling of these issues. Look back at Iron Man 2. In that review, I talk about this. Tony's drinking is a serious, serious problem, but they play it off as a joke in the party scene. And that's what they do with Thor here. Like, Thor's destructive eating and drinking and just depression, it's not a joke. But Marvel treats it like it's a joke for most of the time. Like, there are some scenes where it's really serious, and I really like those scenes, right? Where he's talking to his mom. We'll get to that later. But I just hate that. Like, why can't Marvel just take these things seriously? And also, Fortnite's here. Like, what? Another reference that will make literally zero sense in the next 30 years to the next generation. And finally, the last Avenger to be remaining is Hawkeye. I really think they did some cool stuff with the Ronin character. I mean, the Tokyo action scene is honestly super underrated. Nobody talks about it in Endgame, but I love that scene, honestly. And I love the direction for this character of Hawkeye. He's a broken man. I think that's a really cool place to bring this character. I got no complaints about that. The conversation between him and Natasha, great. No complaints. And then we get to the end of Act 1, which is the time heist planning. Hawkeye runs a little test. We find out it's working. Great. We got to find out the locations now and the times, so let's do it. I gotta give massive kudos to the Russo brothers, though, because it is really smart and really clever how they get to the New York scene with 3 Infinity Stones. Like, I completely forgot that the Ancient One was there. So when they talked about it, I was like, oh yeah, there are 3 Infinity Stones there. That was really smart. Although, if I want to nitpick, what if the Ancient One was like vacationing in the Hong Kong Sanctum or the London Sanctum? Like, what if they showed up and she just wasn't there in the Battle of New York? What then, right? These planning scenes are fun, although I really do think that Thor explaining the Reality Stone was a pretty embarrassing scene. Like, this movie is 3 hours long. You couldn't have condensed that one or just cut it out. It really wasn't that funny, at least not to me. But anyways, now we get our time heist, and we head into Act 2. Like I said before, this film cuts really, really nicely into 3 acts, and this is the definitive end of Act 1. So let's move on to Act 2, the time heist. Alright, so for the sake of making this video a little easier to understand, I'm going to go one time heist at a time. So I'm not necessarily going to go in the exact same order that the movie goes in because they have to cut scenes to make it interesting. I'm just going to go like New York, Asgard, Vormir, all that sort of stuff. So let's start with 2012 in New York. So first up, we get to see the original Avengers again. This is probably easily my favorite out of the 3 time heists. First, let's get the boring stuff out of the way. Bruce talking to the Ancient One is basically just an exposition dump, which is fine. Because like I said in my Infinity War review, you do need these exposition dumps for the audience members who don't know what's going on and who aren't familiar. And I think it's really, really clever how the Ancient One knows to give Bruce the Time Stone because Strange gave it up. I think that's a really, really great angle to take there. Now, let's move on to the Tesseract team. I mean, you knew one of them was going to go wrong, right? First of all, I love seeing the original Avengers and those scenes from a different point of view. That's super fun as always. We get our first taste of the Mark 85. Honestly, I like it a lot more than the Mark 50. You guys know my thoughts on the Mark 50. I really think it's like rubber. I don't like it at all. Not a huge fan. And again, I'm not a huge fan of the Mark 85 either, although I like it a little bit more, but I can live with it. It's fine. Now, the Hulk stairs gag was a little weird and awkward to me, and I don't really love how that's the reason that the time heist fails in 2012. Like, it's just the fact that Tony told Hulk to take the stairs. Wouldn't the older Tony would have remembered that? I guess. It was a huge surprise, of course, to see Robert Redford. That was awesome. And Scott giving Tony a small heart attack and Loki taking the Tesseract. Yeah, that was all really fun. Again, something had to go wrong, and I'm glad it did, because otherwise it would have been a little bit too easy. Now let's talk about the Mind Stone. I think this was easily the best part of the entire time heist. This elevator scene, the fight against himself, brilliantly done. Hail Hydra, one of the most iconic scenes in this movie. I love it. It's great. I honestly just love everything about it, from the self-deprecating jokes about his costume, which, yes, is the worst one. No one argue about it with me in the comments. Okay, fine, you can argue about it with me in the comments. But honestly, it is the worst one. I seriously hate that costume. But yeah, the fight against himself was brilliantly done. The fact that he calls back Bucky, the fact that he has the compass, everything was great about it. But Tony and Scott screwed up, so we head to 1970s New Jersey, which honestly, I'm not a huge fan of. Gonna be honest with you. Because this feels a little bit awkward to me in terms of the story as well. Like, yes, in universe, it makes sense for them to go there. But in terms of the story, to the audience member, it's like, we're going to 1970 to New Jersey? It's kind of like dumping you in the middle of a place that you really don't have any attachment to, right? Like, you know 2012 New York, you know 2013 Asgard, you know 2014 Morag, you know Vormir. But New Jersey, I mean, I know it's Camp Lehigh and all that, but still, just kind of felt a little bit awkward to me. And I'll admit, though, the first time that I saw this movie, I didn't like the Tony Howard scenes. I thought they were a little bit filler. But upon repeat viewings, I realized how important they are to the story and how important they are to the character. So, totally cool with them. I think they're really cool. Because they helped give Tony closure, right? So that he can make the big sacrifice at the end. So let's move on to Asgard 2013. Also, as an aside, if we're just, going to make this video like 3 hours long, I just want to say I think it's kind of funny how even aliens use the Gregorian calendar. Like, Nebula acknowledges the year 2014 as if she knows that. Which means, I guess, the entire universe is based on the same calendar. So, do aliens acknowledge that Jesus existed? Because our years are based on when Jesus was born, right? So it just makes me question for a second, because that doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, that's like the most minor of minor nitpicks, right? I just sort of wonder, though, right? It makes me sort of think. There are things I would have immediately thought of as a writer on this movie. Like little things that where I was writing, Nebula says 2014. And I would have thought and said, well, would she know that? And I wonder if Marcus and McFeely even stopped to consider that. Again, another instance where I just think they kind of dropped the ball a little bit. Anyways, in my eyes, this is pretty clearly an attempt to make Thor the Dark World relevant again. Because if you've seen my video on If the Other Half Dusted, then you know the Power Stone and the Reality Stone are in the Collector's Vault at the same time. So why not go there, right? I don't know. It's almost like Stephen Marcus and Christopher McFeely kind of wrote Thor the Dark World, huh? Now, granted, I don't like a lot about this. Like, it's enjoyable, it's fun, whatever, but I do love the conversation he has with his mom, because that really feels like they're taking his depression and anxiety really seriously. And honestly, the rest of it, not great, because the raccoon is trying to slap a man who's having an anxiety attack. Like, that's not good. But yeah, I guess, if we're trying to make Thor the Dark World more relevant, I'm totally fine with it, I guess. Like, I don't know. I buy into it, and I guess that's enough. And hey, we get Mjolnir back. And the second that happened, the first time I saw this movie, I knew. I knew that Steve was going to pick it up. But anyways. So now 2014. Let's move to MORAG first with Nebula and Rhodey. Now, moving to MORAG, I think it's somewhat interesting that the two Nebulas link up. Again, things go wrong when you meddle with time, like Tony says later. And so they go wrong here too. To be honest, I sort of think it's an odd way to bring Thanos back into the picture, but hey, we needed it to happen, I guess, so there's that. I think it's also interesting that this is how Gamora comes back too, but, fake death's gotta fake deaths, right? In this review, if you've noticed, there's just a lot of instances where I go, you gotta buy into this, or you gotta buy into that, or you gotta buy into this. There's just a lot of stretches in writing, which, I don't know if it's Marcus and McFeely's fault necessarily, or the Russos, or whoever's fault, but there's just a lot of little things that slipped through the crack in my opinion. Anyways, Vormir. Now, the Vormir scene is interesting, and it's always a little bit hit or miss for me when I watch this movie. Sometimes I really, really buy into the Black Widow sacrifice, and other times I think it's a little cheap. Like, sometimes it's really emotional, and other times it's just not. So, admittedly, this past time, I really bought into it. And maybe it's because I've, watched the previous 21 movies, but yeah, this time around, I thought it was great. And it was a really, really noble thing for her to do as a character. I just sort of thought they'd actually do that for Hawkeye instead, though, because, it would have made a little bit more sense to me, at least, based on what he's done as Ronin, killing a bunch of people, and all that sort of stuff, but whatever, it's fine either way, I guess. And now we end Act 2. Again, like I told you before, and I'll say it again, it breaks really cleanly into 3 acts. So this is the end of Act 2. And now we move into Act 3, which is, I think, the best part of this movie. But of course, I think everyone thinks that. So Natasha's death, let's talk about it. Let's talk about how it affects the Avengers. So now we have all the Avengers back, and they're dealing with Natasha's death. And yeah, gotta say, those people who are demanding a Natasha funeral, I'm kind of in agreement with you now. I think they moved on really, really fast. Like, there's one scene where Hulk throws a bench. And then, Rocket scares Hulk and Tony while making an Infinity Gauntlet? Like, what? That was quick, I think. I feel like if you were going to cut something, you would have cut the Thor rambling about the Reality Stone and just made it like a little PowerPoint slide. And then you could have just spent more time with the Avengers talking about Natasha, right? Wouldn't that have made more sense? No? Anyways, let's get on to the second snap. Now, again, I'm really glad that they gave Hulk something really important to do. I really am. I love this character. I love Mark Ruffalo. I think that scene is great on its own. And I think it's great how all the heroes are armored up, too. Like, they're ready for something to go sideways really quickly. You get to see Cap's new scale armor, one of the best Captain America uniforms, I think, next to the Cell suit. It's great. And I think this scene is just a really great one. I have no complaints about it as a whole. I just wish, again, that this wasn't the only good thing that Hulk was going to do in this movie. That's all. That's all I'm saying. And then Hulk opens his eyes and Thanos attacks. He's basically all like,
boom, you looking for this?
Sorry, I had to do it. Credit to New Rockstars, their content is great, but yeah, I had to do it. So now everyone's kind of trapped under the rubble, and honestly, like, would Hawkeye have survived? That is one thought that crossed my mind when I saw this movie again. Like, would Hawkeye have survived an entire building collapsing on him? He has no superpowers, like he's just a regular guy. Little bit hard to believe there, but whatever. Again, gotta buy into it, right? And anyways, now we get our Big 3 versus Thanos. And I think the Big 3 fight versus Thanos is some of the best action in this movie as well. It showcases how much more mature they are now, and how much they've learned as Thor swings immediately for his head, and just how much more gritty this is, right? They're on their last legs, and they're about to take him down. It also just shows how brutal and deadly Thanos is too, which is another great thing. I think his sword and his armor make him just that much more powerful. It's great. And yes, let's talk about Mjolnir. Roll the clip. Cap lifting Mjolnir the second it happened, the second the hammer started lifting, I wanted to cheer in the theater, but no one else did. So, I kept quiet until everyone else caught on to it. But anyways, that moment is golden. And the music is golden. It's a callback to the first Avenger, and I just love this scene. I even love how he just calls on the lightning, like he was waiting for this moment to happen. Again, the music is great, but it really shows how powerful Thanos is because he beats him up anyways, with Mjolnir. He literally just wrecks his shield and cuts it in half, which again, great callback to Age of Ultron. The shield is cut in the exact same way it was in Age of Ultron. Great moment. And now let's move on to portals. Everything about this scene is beautiful. First of all, the music. You knew I was going to talk about it. If you haven't just listened to the Portal score on its own, just look up Portals on YouTube. It is phenomenal. Everything from On Your Left to Black Panther showing up and then the portals opening. Like, I expected everyone to come back. I did. And I also heard rumors, obviously, like Zoe Saldana, Evangeline Lilly. They were all saying, yeah, there's this huge scene with everyone in it. I just didn't expect it to be nearly this epic. And I was not disappointed. It was truly magnificent. I mean, again, if I'm going to nitpick, like, how did Pepper show up with the armor? Like, what? Did Doctor Strange just show up at her house? Like, did Doctor Strange just show up to every single person and just open a portal for them? I don't know. But again, I do not care. This scene is awesome. And then begins the battle for Earth. And hey, we heard you like callbacks, so we got callbacks. From Civil War Black Panther and Hawkeye, to Instant Kill, to Wasp and Ant-Man, to just fan service galore. I absolutely love it. Because fan service is just great in this case. Like, it's warranted. It was built up for 21 movies, and now we just get to reap the rewards. And I absolutely love that. Again, if you want to nitpick, sure, Faceless Army, blah, 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 blah. Again, whatever, right? Like, Faceless Army in Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. But, you know, if it was all the Avengers versus Thanos, he was going to get taken out pretty quickly. I also love the Wanda versus Thanos fight. I think that's one of the best parts of the entire movie. I think that's wonderful because she really gets to showcase her powers and how dangerous she's going to be. And, quote-unquote, spoiler alert, I think she's going to be a big villain coming up. But anyways. And then Captain Marvel's back, and she's fine. I mean, honestly, she doesn't really say much, so she's just there to, you know, beat up Thanos, which is fine, I guess. You know, whatever. If we want to talk about other things, let's talk about the A-Force scene. Now, a lot of people don't really like this scene. They say it's forced. And is it a little forced? Yeah, I'm going to agree with you. But I'm actually totally fine with this scene. Honestly, I really am. Again, I acknowledge that it's pretty forced in there, right? Like, there's no way that all these female superheroes were going to show up in the same spot, right? In the battle, at least. But still, the context and what it means and the consequences and all the repercussions of this scene and just the effect it has on the audience, I think that is totally great. So, yeah. If you want to disagree in the comments with me, then totally do so. But again, I am pretty good with this scene. I think it's cool. And by the way, I think playing hot potato with the gauntlet is a really great angle to take. It's kind of like Ant-Man and the Wasp with the lab. I think Peter Parker just, like, meeting a bunch of new people he has no idea who they are, just, like, swinging from, you know, like, Valkyrie's Pegasus. I think that's great. That stuff is what we really wanted to see in this movie. And side note, when I first saw this movie, I never really understood the time travel van side quest sort of thing that was going on. Like, let's deliver the gauntlet back to the van. Because, you know, it really didn't register to me. I was always just thinking they were just, you know, going after the gauntlet itself. And also, if they just threw the gauntlet into the van, wouldn't that have just screwed up the other timelines? Maybe? Anyways, Doctor Strange tells Tony, yep, this is probably the one. He lifts up the finger, and we get the third snap, the third and final snap. And again, I think this was the only way you could have ended Tony's arc. From the beginning, 2008, the first Iron Man from I Am Iron Man, this was the only way. And I honestly cannot believe that this was a reshoot, like a last-minute thing, because it just feels right. It feels good. His death scene is beautifully done with all the people from his life, from Rhodey, from Peter, to Pepper. It was so, so well done. And I really hope, honestly, don't take this the wrong way, guys. I honestly hope he stays dead. I really do. Because the death scene, his character arc, his sacrifice, it just means so much. If they bring him back in some way, it's just gonna feel so cheap, honestly. And now we head into the epilogue. So yeah, like I said, it's a very, very cleanly cut film. There's a prologue, there's Act 1, 2, 3, and there's an epilogue. Moving on to the funeral, if you guys haven't heard The Real Hero, which is one of the pieces that Alan Silvestri composed for this scene, it is one of the most beautiful pieces of orchestral music that I've ever seen in the modern era. It is so, so masterfully done. You guys have to listen to it again. And seeing all the MCU heroes, you're just reminded of what a journey you've been on. So before we get on to the very, very final scenes with Steve Rogers, let's talk about the future of the MCU that they set up here. First of all, Hawkeye. I think this is sort of something that goes under the radar here, but Hawkeye has killed a lot of people, and his family doesn't know about that, I think. Like, you see a really happy reunion with him and his family, but I don't think they know what he's done. But that's going to be really interesting. Like, are they going to explore that a lot? Kevin Feige said they would in the Hawkeye series, but yeah, that's another really interesting angle. And also, he gets a really nice moment with Wanda, and I have to wonder, you know, you can kind of see Wanda, she's not very happy. Like, she looks, you know, okay at this time, but like she's sort of kind of contemplating, right? And just sort of talking to Clint, you know. And also there's, you know, Thor 4, Guardians 3. So first of all, Valkyrie becomes the new ruler of Asgard. Great, love that. And Thor joins the quote-unquote Asgardians of the Galaxy. That scene was okay. It was fine. Like, you can see how Thor would fit really well with the Guardians of the Galaxy like he did in Infinity War. But again, it was just sort of like, okay, you need to set up the future of the MCU, fine. Whatever. Go for it, Kevin Feige. You honestly deserve it at this point, so I'm not complaining. And now, let's talk about the ending. I think this is the perfect ending for Steve Rogers. It comes full circle. He always put off the life that he wanted to live for the one that he thought he should be living, and now he gets to live the life that he wants to. And yes, time travel makes no sense. Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, I tried to figure out the timeline. It doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. But you know what? Again, another one of those things. We're just going to go with it. Because if the Russos and Marcus and McFeely can't make up their mind, then honestly, why should we, right? So yeah, and also giving the shield to Falcon, going back to sort of the future part of the MCU, I think that's fine. I honestly wouldn't have minded it going to either one, either Bucky or Falcon, and going to Falcon, fine, great. I think Anthony Mackie is cool, and yeah. And thinking about it, there was no other way to end this movie with that shot of Steve and Peggy getting their dance. That was just beautiful. So guys, in the end, I have legitimate problems with Avengers Endgame. I do. And maybe they're personal nitpicks, maybe not. But I've done my best in this video to lay out the reasons as to why I feel the way I do, whether or not you agree. I think that compared to Infinity War, this film is riddled with inconsistencies and problems. The movie just doesn't feel as sound as Infinity War. That being said, this wasn't really meant to be a movie anyways. It was more meant to be a celebration, a culmination, and I get that, I do. Someone told me that they just didn't like this film, and they hadn't been invested in the MCU thus far, and I totally get why. And again, I'm here to judge this as a movie. But know that I respect this film so much for what it represents, and not just for what it is. Just know that this is a movie review, and I will treat it as such. I love Avengers Endgame, for all of its flaws and inconsistencies, but I have to acknowledge that they exist. The prologue is beautiful, the first act is a little hit or miss, the second act is quintessential MCU, but also a little bit cheesy and corny and just goofy, and the third act is some of the best superhero blockbuster filmmaking we've seen in a film ever. This movie gave us the closure that we all needed, and thank goodness it came out in 2019, because imagine if this was scheduled to come out this year. I mean, as if 2020 couldn't get any worse, right? But thankfully we all got to see this, and I am just so grateful for that. So I'm going to give Avengers Endgame a B+, an 8.9 out of 10. Alright, one more for good measure. I may not like it in the movie, but hey, it's a meme.
Look out! Bruce. Damn.
And guys, that was my review of Avengers Endgame. Probably going to be my longest video to date, and honestly the one that I worked the hardest on, so thank you guys so much for watching. And hey, we got one more to go. This Infinity Saga Rewatch series isn't over yet. The next film up is Spider-Man Far From Home. And that's going to conclude this insane 23-part Infinity Saga review series. Thank you guys again so much for your support. These videos have been such a joy to make. These videos were actually the reason that I made this channel in the first place, actually, because the first video that I uploaded was the first Iron Man review. So again, 22 reviews later, this has just been such a joy. And by the way, while you're at it, comment down below with what series of videos you want to see next, or films, I guess, that you want me to review. DCEU, Lord of the Rings, X-Men, Star Wars, let me know. After the Spider-Man review is uploaded, there will still be a lot more Infinity Saga goodness coming your way, like a 23 films ranking video and all that sort of stuff, so yeah, stay tuned for that. In the meantime, what do you guys think of Avengers Endgame? Do you guys think it is the best MCU film? Let me know in the comments down below. And while you're at it, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell to stay notified of any future MCU videos or any other videos on my channel, and also give this video a like to support the channel. If you want to check out some more videos, then check out the videos on the screen right now. Thank you guys again so much for supporting this series, and I'll see you in the next one.